Okay, so what I'm going to be doing today in today's Zoom is just going over what the unit assessment is. We're not doing a test for imperialism in World War I. What we're doing instead is we're going to be doing a little project thing. So I just want to make sure that you're aware of what that is and what it looks like. So in the US2 Unit 4 Imperialism in World War I, as you're scrolling out down, just above the unused materials is the unit assessment. It's due December 4th, and it's worth a considerable amount of points. But it should be fairly straightforward to do, so let's get into it and look at what it is. So instead of the test, you're kind of making a sort of virtual scrapbook kind of activity. Essentially, I'll just walk through the steps. You can use PowerPoint or Google Slides, whichever program you're more familiar with. I'm not too particularly picky. What I base my grading on is this rubric here. And so the rubric is how I grade things. Essentially, when I'm going through, I'm going to be like, okay, has a title page, check. This slide's done correctly, this slide's done correctly, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's kind of how this all works. But let's work through it. So what it amounts to is you've got this list here. You will need to cite your sources in MLA format, but I'll get to that in a little bit. But what we're looking for in this PowerPoint or Google Slides activity is you need a title page, and this title page will have your name, the class period, and some sort of catchy title, something to catch people's interests. And then your first slide or so, this is a caveat. If you can't fit everything comfortably on like one slide, you can use multiple slides to do it. But essentially, I'm looking for at least one slide that covers these points. But the first slide is kind of looking at the onset of the war. What starts World War I? If you're thinking about it, it's kind of the start of the scrapbook. What kicks off this mess? And you'll notice that there are some resources that you can use, like the main causes assignment that I think is due later this week. That's a great source of information to completing this activity. The next slide or slides is on trench warfare. How does it work? What does it look like? I talk about that some in the unit introduction, and that's a good resource. But that's another example. But you're kind of getting in this layout, this slide series, you're kind of getting into, okay, what is it like in the trenches? What is it like down in there? This next one, the layout 3, is kind of you pick a battle that the U.S. before the U.S. gets involved, which is most of the battles, and you kind of give some details on that. Kind of, if you want some guidance on that, what you might want to put in is who's fighting. You might want to put, if you want an image, a good image is like maybe a picture of the battle, or a picture or a map of where the battle occurred, some things like that, and just give a bit of a description of a battle that occurred before the U.S. enters the war. Layout 4, if you want to basically take the exact same method that you had for layout 3 and use it again, only pick a battle the U.S. was involved in, that's perfectly fine. That's a good way of doing it. Layout 5, you're basically putting into the description of what is it like on the home front. And this is where you talk about the American home front during the Great War. There are some activities, and your textbook has an entire section devoted to it, so that's a good resource for that. But that's a good one for that one. Layout 6, this is kind of the last slide or slides, depending on how you're doing it, is you're kind of going through the sequence of events of what ends the Great War. And that's what it's going to be doing here. So these are some examples of things that are discussed in that kind of thing. The last part is on the last slide, I'd like for you to cite your sources, and I'm going to talk a bit about that. I do have a tool that's available to you. It's posted here, and I believe it is posted in the module for the student resources, so at the top of the modules page. But here's a tour of what that looks like. I think you guys have used MLA some in your English classes, and so that any advice you got from your English teachers, that's pretty much what I'm looking for here. So how the citing the sources works. A lot of people just use a program like EasyBib, and you plug in your information and it spits out the correct citation, and that's perfectly fine. And then you can just copy and paste those citations into a slide or two to cite your sources. So this link here will probably be the most useful, but some people might find these other ones helpful as well if you want more information on MLA citation style. Essentially what I'm getting at here is these are the things I'm going to be looking for, and your method of presenting this information is fairly open-ended. You've got options. You can use PowerPoint, you can use slides. There's a program on Microsoft called Microsoft Sway, which is like a modernized, streamlined version. But I'm not too picky about the method. I'm mainly looking at the content of what you're presenting. But